In America right now, more than a third of people earning six figures say they are living paycheck to paycheck. Not people earning $40,000. Not people earning $60,000. People earning $100,000 a year. The number everyone was taught meant you'd made it. Here's the number that should stop you. Someone earning $100,000 in a major city today has less real purchasing power than someone earning $58,000 did 3 decades ago. Same six figures, less life. It isn't a spending problem, not at first. It isn't even really an inflation problem, though inflation is part of it. It's something else, a quiet mechanism baked into the number itself that nobody explains, and it is currently draining the exact people who think they've already won. I know how that sounds. Let me earn it. The 100K rule is simple, and almost nobody states it directly because they don't have to. It's absorbed, not taught. Hit six figures and you're financially secure. Buy the house, buy the car, stop worrying. The number itself is the finish line. It's a reasonable thing to believe because for a long time it genuinely was true. In 1990, a household income of about $58,000 put you solidly in the top 20% of earners in the country, comfortably above every meaningful cost of living, whether you were in a small town or a major city. Back then, six figures wasn't just comfortable, it was rare. Fewer than 1 in 10 households crossed it. The number carried real weight because so few people reached it, and because the cost of an ordinary life was so far beneath it. Then decades passed, wages climbed, prices climbed faster in most places that matter. And somewhere along the way, culture simply rounded the old benchmark up to a clean, memorable figure, $100,000, without ever checking whether the math that made the original number meaningful had come along for the ride. It hadn't. The number stuck. The purchasing power underneath it quietly moved somewhere else, and almost nobody updated the story they were telling themselves. Meet Trevor. He's 32, works in sales, and just crossed $100,000 for the first time in his life. He remembers exactly where he was standing when he opened the offer letter, because it felt like arriving somewhere he'd been trying to reach for years. And Trevor does exactly what almost everyone does the month this happens. He upgrades. Not recklessly. Nothing about Trevor looks reckless from the outside. A slightly nicer apartment because he can finally afford it. A newer car, financed over 6 years because the monthly payment is basically nothing on this kind of salary. Dinners out become the default instead of the occasional treat. Because what is even the point of hitting the number if you don't let yourself feel it? Individually, not one of these decisions looks like a mistake. A nicer apartment isn't reckless. A car payment isn't reckless. A few extra dinners out isn't reckless. That is exactly what makes this dangerous. There is no single moment where Trevor does anything wrong. There is only an accumulation of perfectly reasonable choices, each one calibrated against a number that was never actually his to spend. Meet Priya. She crosses the same $100,000 salary, the same year, in the same city, at a comparable job, with a comparable title. She does not upgrade. And I want to be honest about why, because it isn't some rare, monk-like discipline that most people can't access. She simply keeps living roughly the way she was living at $80,000 for one more year, and lets the difference sit somewhere she doesn't see it every day, out of her checking account and into an account she rarely opens. That's the entire mechanism. Not willpower. Just distance between the money and the moment she'd be tempted to spend it. Two people. Same number on the offer letter. Same city. Same take-home pay. At least on paper. And by the end of this video, the gap between them is going to be larger than most people's entire net worth. Here is where the $100,000 rule actually falls apart. And it happens in 3 separate stages. Each one invisible on its own, each one quietly eating a chunk of the number before it can do anything for you. Stage 1 is taxes, and it's the most obvious one, though most people have never actually run it. A $100,000 salary is not $100,000. After federal income tax, payroll tax for Social Security and Medicare, and depending on the state income tax on top of that, a single filer in a higher tax state can lose close to $28,000 before a single dollar ever reaches their bank account. That leaves real take-home pay closer to $72,000. Already, before a single purchase is made, the six figures everyone congratulated Trevor on doesn't exist. It was never going to exist. It was a number on a job posting, not a number in a bank account. Stage 2 is the lifestyle the number is quietly assumed to support. And this is where geography does most of the damage. The 100K rule was built around a cost of living from a different decade, and it has not been updated since. Median rent for a one-bedroom in a major metro today runs well past $2,000 a month, which is over $24,000 a year before a single other expense is added. Add groceries that have climbed sharply in just the last few years, a car payment, insurance, phone, internet, the ordinary friction of simply existing as an adult, and the comfortable salary is functionally spoken for before a dollar of it ever reaches a savings account. And this stage alone varies enormously by where you live. A $100,000 salary in a small city with $1,200 rent behaves completely differently from the identical salary in a place where that same apartment costs $2,800. The rule treats both incomes as identical. Stage 3 is the one nobody names, and it is the part that isn't about cost of living at all. This is Trevor's stage. The moment the number crosses that psychological line, spending doesn't rise to match the new take-home pay of $72,000. It rises to match the number printed on the offer letter, the full $100,000, the one that was never actually going to land in the bank. People don't sit down and budget against $72,000. They budget mentally against $100,000 because that is the number they were told for years would mean they'd arrived, and arriving is supposed to feel like something. Run Trevor forward 5 years on this path. His real take-home pay is $72,000. His new apartment, his financed car, his upgraded restaurant habit, all the perfectly reasonable individual decisions, now cost him roughly $69,000 a year to maintain. He is saving about $3,000 a year on a six-figure salary, the number that was supposed to mean he'd made it. He is, in every meaningful sense, still living paycheck to paycheck. He simply does it with a nicer car and a better address, which somehow makes it feel less like a warning sign and more like success. Priya, over the same 5 years with the same take-home pay in the same city, keeps her actual cost of living near $52,000 a year. She isn't depriving herself. She still goes out, still travels occasionally, still upgrades things that matter to her. She's saving and investing roughly $20,000 a year, every year, without a single dramatic decision behind it. Same salary, same job title, same city, same take-home pay. One of them is quietly building a life that can eventually run without a paycheck. The other is one bad month, one job loss, one unexpected bill, away from a credit card balance he doesn't currently have. So here's the reveal, and it's the entire point of this video. The $100,000 rule was never really about $100,000 at all. It only feels like it is. Invested at a conservative long-run return of 7% a year, Priya's $20,000 annual gap compounds to just over $980,000 in 25 years. Trevor's $3,000 annual gap, invested at the exact same return, compounds to about $147,000 over the same 25 years. Same salary the entire time, same city, same starting point. An $833,000 difference between two people who, on paper, on every resume and every offer letter, looked financially identical the entire way through. Not because Priya earned more money. She earned the exact same number Trevor did, at the exact same level, in the exact same market. The $100,000 rule promises security at a number. What actually determines the outcome was never the number on the offer letter. It was always the number left over after the number did what numbers do to people, which is make them feel like the work of building a life is already finished. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you if you've ever hit a number like this yourself. It isn't just Trevor's math that breaks. It's the entire cultural shorthand built around six figures, in every city, at every income level above and below it. The rule was never really a rule. It was a rounding error mistaken for a finish line. And an entire generation has been budgeting against it as if it were gospel. There's a version of this that plays out even earlier than Trevor and Priya, and it's worth naming because it changes how the whole story reads. Meet a third person, David, who never actually reaches $100,000 at all. He tops out around $78,000 in a mid-sized city where a one-bedroom runs closer to $1,100 a month instead of $2,000. His take-home pay, after the same categories of tax, lands near $61,000. But because his cost of living is genuinely lower, and because he was never handed a number to aspire toward that made $61,000 feel small by comparison, he keeps his living costs near $43,000 a year without ever framing it as a sacrifice. That leaves him an $18,000 annual gap, invested at the same 7%, compounding to just under $882,000 over 25 years. David never touched six figures in his life. He still finishes almost exactly where Priya does, nowhere near Trevor, despite Trevor's resume looking like the impressive one at every single dinner party. The number on the offer letter told you nothing true about any of these three people. Only the gap did. So forget the six-figure marker completely. It was never a finish line, and it was never designed to be one. It's a psychological trigger, and the moment it fires is the moment most people's real financial risk actually begins, not the moment it ends. The number that matters, the only one worth calculating the day you get a raise or a new offer, is the gap. Take-home pay minus what it actually costs you to live. A $60,000 salary with a $15,000 annual gap will outbuild a $150,000 salary with a $3,000 annual gap every single time, without exception, because compounding only ever works on what's left over at the end of the month. It has never once worked on what you were paid. So if you just crossed $100,000, or you're about to, or you're sitting somewhere below it wondering when you'll finally feel secure, do the one thing the culture around that number has never once told you to do. Don't calculate what you can now afford. Calculate what's actually left after everything real leaves your account. That number, not the one on the offer letter, not the one people congratulate you on, is the only one that was ever going to set you free. If you want to run this exact math on your own numbers, your real take-home after taxes in your actual state, your real cost of living in your actual city, and the number you genuinely build over the next 25 years. At your real savings gap, instead of Trevor's or Priya's or David's, that is exactly the kind of calculator we build inside the vault, and it takes about 2 minutes to run. Put in your salary, put in your rent, and it shows you your actual gap instead of the one culture assumes you have. The link is below. One last thing worth sitting with before you go. None of this means chasing a higher salary is pointless. A bigger number is still, all else equal, a genuine advantage. Trevor's mistake was never that he earned too much. It's that he let the size of the number decide the size of his life before he'd ever checked what the number actually left behind. The fix isn't to earn less, or to feel guilty about earning more. It's to run the gap every single time the number changes, before your spending has a chance to quietly rise and meet it. Do that once, honestly, and the number on your offer letter stops being a finish line and starts being exactly what it always should have been, a starting point for a calculation, not a reason to stop calculating. And if this is the first time anyone has told you plainly that the six-figure number was never the finish line, do one thing for me: subscribe. So the next time culture hands you a number to celebrate, you check the math sitting quietly underneath it first.